I became aware of the March on Washington movement, which A. Philip Randolph had founded in order to demand jobs for blacks in defense industries. Because the Depression had ended for white workers in 1940-41, but not for blacks. And so many blacks were ready to march on Washington that Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was preparing for a war against racism in Europe, had to issue Executive Order 8802 banning discrimination in defense plants. And that was the first sign that blacks were on the move, and that what had been primarily a movement of white workers in the 30s, though not exclusively so, was being, in a sense, I don't know what the word is I should use, but that another element had entered, another group, a social force had emerged on the scene. And I say that because unless one understands that, unless one understands that the black movement, which had such an enormous importance in the 60s, first emerged in the March on Washington movement in 1941, it's very difficult to understand the second half of the 20th century. It radicalized me. I decided that if a movement could do that, if it could force the president to ban discrimination, that's what I want to do with my life. So I joined the radical movement. And in the course of joining the radical movement, I met C.L.R. James. C.L.R. James is a West Indian Marxist who had come to this country in 1938. But it was the fact that blacks, having gone through the war, having fought within segregated armed service, were coming back to the United States determined not to accept that status anymore. And so all sorts of spontaneous activities were taking place on the part of blacks. Young people were going to the front of the bus, refusing to go to the back. Veterans were doing the same sort of thing. And something was obviously in the wind. In 1955, this led to the Montgomery bus boycott. And the Montgomery bus boycott was very different from previous struggles in the sense that the blacks of Montgomery, instead of just protesting, decided to carry on a boycott which lasted more than a year, during which they distinguished themselves as representative of a more human society. It was not through the process of production. It was not just as black workers. It was a community in struggle.